Hey everybody, it's Mark Pereira. I just wanted to get on here and discuss some things. We had our Winter Nights Festival last night with the OR, and it was really successful. We had a great time. It was just pretty much just the core families that do the rites here, but it was still a great experience. And while we were there, I got to do a talk, right? And I really like doing the talks for everybody and discussing things. And we kind of broke it down where we had sort of a discussion after the talk and started working out, looking at ideas and stuff like that. And really what we were going into was the ideas of what the basis of ritual is. What's its purpose? What is its meaning? Why do we do it, right? And there's all kinds of ideas out there about why we come together for ritual. People think it's just a way just to hang out with friends and perform some traditions and stuff like that, And sorry, I got my dog on me. Go away. So we're looking at like the meaning behind it. What's the meaning? What's the core purpose behind the whole thing? And so we were discussing this and we're looking at the purpose behind it. And I really like in the research that we're doing, and I wanted to let everybody know that we're actually working on a ritual course. We're going to be building an entire online university, and that's something that we're working really hard on. And I'm building a ritual course at the moment on that. We're going to have a course for all 12 fundamentals, and so each fundamental is going to be represented in the course, and it's going to be something that will allow you to basically be accredited in every single one of these fields. And we're going to use all the best research that we've done, just the years of collecting information and putting things together and focusing on one aspect of this culture at a time and just making this happen, okay? So the one cool thing about it that I always try to emphasize with people, and that's why we have the fundamentals, is that when you focus on these things, when you focus on just one aspect, you gain so many insights and you just learn so much. And that's why I like to do it. I get inspired by it because when I move towards a specific fundamental, I mean, there's just so much there and there's so much to learn and explore, and it's really fun and I really like doing it. So when I started doing this ritual course, I started putting together outlines and I started looking in sources and piecing things together. And one thing that I started to pick up, and get is sort of the fundamental of ritual. Like, what does it mean? What's the origin of it? What's the core of it? We see all these different traditions, all of these different things like cart processions and maypole dances and songs, and we look at stone carvings and all these different things that we get together and we're like, why did they do this? Like, what is the meaning behind it? And I really think that we've kind of hit on that. I really think that we're starting to sort of paint the picture and figure it out. Now, the thing I want to look at first when we're discussing this is really the core fundamental of any religion, right? When you're looking at the basis of a belief system, a religion, you see like it's all centered around sort of the actions, the work, or the sacrifice of a god, right? So when a god has like this sacrifice, when a god suffers or when a god toils, then that becomes the central focus of the entire religion. You think of like Christianity, when Christ dies on the cross, he dies to save mankind from their sins, and so Christianity is a salvation religion. You look at Buddhism, when Buddha meditates for years to gain enlightenment, that becomes his central focus, and so it is a religion of enlightenment. It's a religion of meditation and trying to gain that enlightenment. So there's a lot of things in that. You look at like the old cult of Bacchus in Rome. Their focus was ecstasy, because Bacchus was the god of wine and ecstasy, and that's what he did. And so when you look at these different focal points, and when you look at this central idea in a religion, you can start to ask yourself, like, what is the central idea behind Odinism or Asatru? What is the meaning behind it? And we see that in Odin's sacrifice upon Yggdrasil. That's probably the most important event, because that's when Odin suffers, that's when he toils, that's when he does his work in order to gain inspiration. And that's what the focus of the religion is. That's what the focus of the belief is to gain inspiration. Odin dies, he hangs himself on Yggdrasil for 9 days and 9 nights, stabbed with his spear, starving and thirsty, and he doesn't receive anything. And then he basically dies because we see him in the branches of Yggdrasil, and then when he goes down to the to drink from the well's in the underworld, and so he basically, his soul travels into the underworld and he drinks from the mead of inspiration. Now, the interesting thing about that is the mead of inspiration is also called the mead of poetry. Now, poetry is a very important thing because the poetry is where all the lore comes from. And so there's ideas on, not just on, looking at a poem and reading a story out of it, but also on the structure of it, the meter of it. All of those things were important. They were sacred. They were valued as a religious entity. And so when Odin dies and he goes into the underworld to gain the runes and to drink from the mead of inspiration, he's telling us that that inspiration is the core of everything, that is the focus of our religion, is to be inspired. And it's why our people throughout history have always sought the next horizon. They've always explored and looked to the next world and tried to look across the planet to the next nation, the next land, the next technology, the next idea, because it's an idea from our core, from the earliest of our ancestors, of having that inspiration. And Odin himself, his name means the inspiring one. The word Other, which is the core of his name, basically means inspiration or will or spirit. The idea of soul, of being inspired by something, by a work of art, by your focus in life, by everything that you're doing is to try to gain that inspiration and seek that next inspiring moment, right? So that's what it's about. And so we have, when Odin goes to drink from the well, right, he drinks from Odrur, and Odrur means the rouser of Odor, the rouser of spirit, the thing that inspires. And when the Odin and his brothers create develop Ask and Imbla, the first man and woman, Honor gives them Odr, which is the core of Odin's name. Then you have the name Other, which is Freya's husband, who's also called Hermother, which is connected to it. And so you have this idea of basically rousing the spirit, inspiring people, bringing them inspiration. It's a very important key to all of this. This is like the linchpin to our entire belief system, because Other is everything. It's being inspired. It's connecting to the gods. And like they felt like when they were inspired, they were touched by the gods, that the gods had just reached into their mind and touched them. And so when they have this eureka moment, when you're like trying to figure out a riddle or a puzzle or something like that, or breaking down the layers of symbolism within lore or ritual, anything like that, that eureka moment was being touched by the gods. That was inspiration. That was divine intervention or something like that, right? So it's so integral. It's so important to the entire belief system. And so what happens is, when you look at like skaldic poetry, okay, so the skalds, they would write these really, really complex metaphorical verses so that you'd have to figure it out. You have to think of like a skald standing in front of a court of gathered people, and he's speaking these very intense, very complex verse structures, and so that people who were listening to it could figure out what they were saying. So they would look at the skaldic poetry and you see all these metaphors that they don't make sense. I mean, it took scholars like almost a century to figure out like what they were saying, because they were from the outside looking in. This was their culture. It was everything. They woke up and they ate, breathed, and slept this stuff. But it was still complex to them. And for us, being outsiders looking into these ancient religions, it's even more difficult for us. So we have there was a lot of difficulty in trying to interpret the skaldic passage, but that was the purpose for it. That's the purpose for all the lore. That's why all the lore has all these many, many different layers of symbolism and things that connect to others, and there's kind of tricks in it and stuff like that. And then, the Nordic Society is working on our own translation of the Poetic Edda, and we're going to basically be unlocking a lot of that, because a lot of times when scholars couldn't understand something, they would just change the poem. And we're not going to do that. We're going to get rid of all that. We're not going to have a single emendation, not a single interpolation in any of our books, because we feel like that's just corrupted all of it. So we're going to start looking at how we can unravel these things and see the symbols for ourselves, how to inspire our Other, how to basically rouse the spirit and inspire each other. And so one of the things that we look at when we're considering this, now we've looked at, the Other, we've looked at inspiration, we see Odin as the god of inspiration, and we see that inspiration is the core value of our belief system. So that also becomes part of the lore, and looking at the lore. Now, beyond that is the ritual. Now, the ritual is the most fascinating part of it, because it's when the lore comes to life. This is when the sources become reality, and it becomes something that permeates within the ritual setting, and it's basically built like a giant puzzle. And that's why it became so elaborate. And when you look at like Hinduism and you see other religions like Catholicism and stuff like that, when they have these huge festivals, and there's just tons and tons and tons of symbols within every single tiny aspect of it. And then that ritual has, that aspect has more and more layers built upon it, and more layers built upon it. It basically becomes a big giant puzzle. And so the idea was, you as a practitioner, not only listening to what the Gadi or Gidya is saying, but also looking for the symbols, seeing them, experiencing them, sort of downloading them into your subconscious so that you can connect to your ancestors and connect to the symbols, and then have that eureka moment. Oh, now I know what this means. I know exactly what this is saying now. This connects to this and this and this. And so once you know the lore and you know the stories and you know the poems, and you can start to figure it out, when you perform a rite or when you experience a rite, you can start to break down that odor, sort of that inspiration. Like, what does this mean? And that's why the rituals would become so complex, because they were trying to develop more and more layers of the puzzle for you to figure out. And so, like, one of the things, I watched a video recently on Protestant religion, and basically the Reformation was rebellion against all of that, right? A rebellion against the whole idea of having symbolism within architecture, within ritual, within all these different things. And they basically broke down their buildings where they're just blank, boring, sort of modern art beginnings, and there's nothing there. There's no symbolism. There's no puzzle within it. It's just as blank as possible, and it's just a guy yelling at you. Whereas in ancient cultures, symbolism was everything. The symbols were permeated throughout the entire religion and would permeate throughout the ritual itself. So you'd have to look at that when you're performing rites, when you're writing rituals, which is something that we're doing, and we're putting this ritual course together. When you're looking at that, start to focus that in your development of these rites and these ideas behind it, because you want to make the puzzle as complex as possible. Because the more complex it is, the more spiritual it is, because people have to figure it out. They have to get it and sort of download all of these symbols and these ideas. So when we're seeing all of these different things that people have collected over the the last 200 years, and we find all of these different things like cart processions, and we see dances and music and nature worship and pantheon and all these different things, that these different aspects that develop, and we're trying to examine and understand. The understanding comes from the idea that these people were basically building a giant puzzle. And the giant puzzle was something for you to figure out, and something that you connect to, and to rouse the spirit, to inspire you, to make you think. And not just think on the on the left side of the brain, which is analytical, but also on the right side, which experiences the abstract and the symbolic, right? So this is ritual. This is what it means, and this is why you do it. This is why you perform it, and this is why you experience it. It's to rouse the spirit. It's to rouse your mind and your body and your soul, and connect you to the gods through that inspiration. So you want to have those layers of symbolism. You want to experience them. You want to, to connect to them, so that you can continue to have these eureka moments and inspire you through the also true beliefs. All right. So that's what I got on that. Share this video if you can, because I really think this is important. We also have a video on ritual called Hallowed Rite that you can look at, that sort of shows you how we broke down a lot of that, and we can take that as a core and start building rituals and having religious experiences. Because as you start to understand the Other, and you start to understand the purpose behind ritual, then you can start developing these symbols and start building it and building it and building it. All right, so everybody have a great day.